All right. The book, Tanisaro on the Path, which is my source for much of this. Right Mindfulness Part 2. We studied Right Mindfulness working through the Noble Eightfold Path, or the Eight-Limbed Path. Give it a little bit of a different metaphor, so it's not progressive, it's organic and more growth-oriented. So Right Mindfulness, we started that last week. We will finish it this week. Recap of just a couple of things we talked about very briefly last week. One of the key elements of mindfulness is remembering, ardent, alert, and mindful. Mindful as in remembering. Remembering is never forget who you are. Sri Ramana Maharshi, never forget who you are. So there's this practicing mindfulness, part of that is always remembering who you are, which is not who you think you are. Never who you think you are. We also spent quite a lot of time talking about bare attention or naked awareness and lots of phrases like that, which has some value, but there are a lot of misunderstandings around a lot of the use of that phrase, and there are some dangers around it. So I'm not going to go over it again, but if you want to listen to the talk from last week, I think that's a particularly important area. And then there's a refrain which shows up. We're going to talk through the Anapanasati and the Satipatthana today. That's basically what I'm going to do today. There's a refrain, and we'll go through it when we get into those two. But mindfulness is effort and mindfulness are the two of the 37 factors of wings of awakening that show up most, probably. And when mindfulness shows up, it is so often accompanied by this refrain. So these are really the key elements of mindfulness that we will talk through. All right, so let's jump in. And I think I start on page 367. So the Anapanasati Sutta. The Anapanasati Sutta, Anapanasati is in-breath, out-breath mindfulness. It's mindfulness of breathing. And it is reputedly the practice that Buddha was engaged in when he woke up. So that at that time when he went through that final stage of his practice and he became fully self-realized, this was supposedly the practice he was actually engaged in, which makes and it's a practice that can be followed as a practice. It's very stepwise, very well structured. But Tanisaro talked about it in this book in the context of mindfulness rather than concentration, and that just really made me think about it a little differently. And so it's really an interesting way to look at it. So we're going to look at it tonight and go through it as a mindfulness practice rather than as a concentration practice. So in simple terms, you've probably all come across it before. The heart of it is 16 tetrads, which are broken up into 4 sets of 4. The first are all about breathing in, breathing out, aware of the body, calming the body. The second is more about, it's about mental formations, feelings. So it's joy, pleasure, becoming aware of bodily feelings, becoming aware of mental fabrications, calming mental fabrications. And then the third one is more intentionally the mind. So it's gladdening the mind and freeing the mind. And then the last tetrad is more about dharmas. It's about impermanence and noticing impermanence, and then calming, a different kind of calming things down. So we'll step through those 4 tetrads. It then goes on from there to talk about how those tetrads actually line up with the 4 elements of the Satipatthana, which is the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which we'll talk through. And we'll talk about those 4 chunks more as we get through it, but there's 4 chunks. And then it goes into another set of practices, which are the 7 factors of awakening. So that's the basic structure. The first part of it is the bit I'm most interested in here, though. So, and how is mindfulness of in and out breathing developed and pursued so as to bring the 4 establishings of mindfulness to their culmination? So the first tetrad, whenever a monk breathes in long, he's aware I'm breathing in long. Breathing out, breathing in short, where he's breathing in short, breathing out on that, trains himself, I will breathe in, and out, aware of bodily formations, calming bodily formations. So those are the 4. And then here's the refrain. On that occasion, The monk remains focused. Remains focused is self-evident, but that's one of the core tenets of right mindfulness, is remaining focused. And then in the body in and of itself, which is this locative case. So it's actually, you're in the body, aware of the body. Kind of a cumbersome grammatical thing, but it's actually being there in the body while you're aware of it. So it's whatever the subject of mindfulness is, being completely at one with that subject of mindfulness is right there in that place. So remains focused in that locative sense, ardent, alert, and mindful. Ardent is effort, which I just said a minute ago, effort and mindfulness are the two things that show up most often. Effort is really, really stressed in the Pali Canon, right effort. So ardent is that right effort. Alert, which is, alert is attentive, and mindful, and the emphasis there is on remembering. And then here's the other piece of it, subduing greed and distress with reference to the world. Subduing greed and distress with reference to the world, which is really about renunciation of the senses. And that's at the desire realm, and then we'll move into the form and the formless realms. But it's about this renunciation, stepping back from being sucked into the stories. It's not that the senses are a problem, but the strings of sensuality, that which sucks us in. It's not that skandhas are a problem, but the skandhas of clinging, when it becomes something that we get attached to, that starts to become a problem. So then we move into the second tetrad, which is, and these are all now framed not as noticing he's breathing in, noticing he's breathing out. They are on whatever the monk trains himself. I will breathe in, ... I will breathe out, sensitive to rapture. So this is intentional training. This is effort. This is work. And they are also intentionally focused. They're all intentionally placing attention somewhere, in and on something. So it's this effort, alert, and then implicit in this is remembering as well, because as we practice, what works we notice, that's skillful, and we do it again. What doesn't work we notice, and we don't do it again. So there's this iterative, recursive learning, what's skillful, what's not skillful, and becoming more and more skillful as we continue this practice. So one thing I meant to mention about the breathing, we tend to think of breathing as just the breath. But in yoga practices, and it's very visible in Tibetan Buddhist practices, and we talk about it in the Pali Canon, but don't focus on it in the same way. We're not just this body. There's the sensual body, the realm of desire, and then there's the form realm, and then the formless realm. The form realm is kind of the subtle realm, and if you wanted to get into Kundalini and chakras, that's the energy body. If you wanted to deal with the Mahayana Buddhist stuff, that would be in the Trikaya, the three bodies, that would be the Sambhogakaya, the bliss body. And then there's the formless realm. So one of the things that's happening as we go through this is we're moving through those different bodies. But the breathing, when we're breathing in, breathing out, it's not just the air through the lungs. We can pay attention to the whole flow of energy through the bodies. And if you can actually find and locate your chakras, you can feel energy moving. This energy is not quite exactly right, but it's the best way I can describe it, and it's often used for this kind of stuff. But it's not just air. It's being really attentive to what's going on in the body when we're present in the body, mindful of the body, in the body. We can start to notice things we didn't notice before. A great, for instance, is if we center our energy in the word in Japanese, it's tanden or hara. It's a place that's just below the belly button and about a couple of inches back. It's right in the center of mass of the body, center of gravity of the body. If we bring our attention there and our breathing there and really focus our energy there, that is an incredibly stable place. Never played with martial arts, but I understand martial artists often place their energy there. But if you're going into a difficult meeting or a difficult conversation or a time of stress, putting your energy there can be really powerful, really stabilizes you and really helps. So this is kind of, it's not air breathing, it's we're moving energy around as we do this, whatever that is. So rapture, pleasure, mental fabrications, or sensitive to mental fabrications, and calming mental fabrications. These are steps that those of you who have read the jhanas, which are these absorption states, will recognize. This is settling down into the absorption states. And again, if you think about the different realms, those 4 jhanas are talked about as the form realm. And there is a distinct sensation, and it's kind of hard to describe. The closest I can come is it's like lying on the beach sunbathing. There's like just this warm, kind of warm, glowing feeling in the body. It's pleasant. It's very subtle, and so there's a different subtle feeling of existence as we settle into these absorption states. And mindfulness is tracking all of these changes. Mindfulness is being aware of all of that stuff as we go through here. So then it goes through the same with the mind. I don't think there's anything particular I want to bring out with the mind. And then with the dharmas. I'm conscious of time. I want to make sure we do a good job on the satipatthana too. Yeah, I think that'll do on the Anapanasati. So then we get onto the Satipatthana Sutta, which is the sutta that is most often talked about when people talk about mindfulness when they look at the Pali Canon. Satipatthana, I can't remember the Sanskrit roots properly, but sati is mindfulness. Patthana, one of these 2 words, patthana and upatthana, they mean different things. One means foundation, and one means establishing. So it's an intentional pun. And a lot of Buddhist teaching has got Buddha used a lot of these very clever, slightly, subtly different words. It means slightly different things, and so it's not absolutely a polar meaning, it's a subtle meaning. So we've got the 4 establishings or foundations of mindfulness. Begins with the same. What are the 4 establishings of mindfulness? There is the case where a monk remains, guess what? Focused on the body in and of itself. It's the first foundation, body in and of itself. Ardent, alert, and mindful, subduing greed and distress with respect to the world, with reference to the world. Exactly the same refrain shows up again and again and again. So we begin with the body, and guess what it does? Always mindful, he breathes in. Mindful, he breathes out. So it's this breathing again. Just start with the breathing. And again, the breathing is not just this air breathing. It's much more subtle than that. And he does the breathing in long, breathing out long, sensitive to the entire body, calming the body. In this way, he remains focused internally on the body in and of itself, or externally on the body in and of itself, or both internally and externally. That's quite complicated. What does internally focused on the body and externally focused on the body actually mean? But it's there's a word that shows up a lot in concentration practice, ikagata, which is often translated as single-pointed. So we think of single-pointed concentration, single-pointed awareness. But I am persuaded it doesn't mean single-pointed as in like tip of this pen, single-pointed. It means, I believe, a single field or a single area, and it can be broad, it can be deep. So the body is a field. The body is an appropriate subject of mindfulness or area of mindfulness. Subject is wrong because that involves the subject-object distinction, and we're doing it from within the body. But theme, it represents an appropriate theme. But the body isn't like this single point. The body is complicated and broad. And it doesn't, where does it end? Does it really end at skin? What is inside? What is outside? So there's this internally, externally, is really opening up it's opening up that practice of mindfulness. We're in the body, but we're really exploring what body actually means. And then it goes on, or he remains focused on the phenomenon of origination with regard to body and the phenomenon of passing away with respect to the body. So pain in the legs, sitting too long, my legs get pins and needles. And it's not aware of the arising of pain, it's being mindful of the phenomenon of arising, phenomenon of origination. So we're not calling it pain. Something originated. There's a phenomenon that arose. Being mindful of the phenomenon of origination. Where does it come from? How does it come? Being mindful at that point of origination to experience that origination. It's not about content. Absolutely not about the content of the phenomenon. It's being aware of the phenomenon of origination itself, which is getting to the heart of impermanence, getting to the heart of not self, non-self, not quite self. What is self? Where is it coming from? What is it? And how does this thing originate and come into this field of awareness? Further, when walking, he discerns, or the monk discerns, I am walking. When standing, discerns, I am standing. Very practical stuff. We're still on the body here. And further, just as a sack with both ends were full of various grains, and a man, so pouring grains into a sack. So we started to look at the body in this very materialistic sense. So you end up with the 32 body parts. You end up with head hair, skin hair, nails, teeth. What else we got? Skin, that's the other one. So you end up with so there's 32 body parts. And this then moves into body scan, becoming aware of the impermanence of the body, becoming revolted by the body, as in, we tend to think of this as a wonderful thing, but as we start looking at it, we figure out what it's made of, and that it will rot and decay. And it's not quite as wonderful as we think it is. And this, at one point in one of the sutras, apparently led to a mass suicide of monks, because the monks got so disgusted with their bodies, they couldn't deal with this anymore. So that then gets balanced with things like the Metta Sutta and intentional loving kindness and compassion practice. But this, the being really attentive to and mindful of the body and examining body parts is part of this. And then we go further into that realm. And this, if you go back to the refrain, subduing greed and distress with reference to the world. If we start noticing this body isn't this wonderful, beautiful thing that we should absolutely pander and cover with oil and fill with pleasure, we used to think it was, that's starting to move us away from all of these pleasures, right? And then, just as a dexterous butcher or butcher's apprentice, having killed a cow, would sit at a crossroads cutting it up into pieces, the monk contemplates this very body in terms of properties. There's a story somewhere of cutting a carcass up and then putting all the flesh back on it, so it looks exactly the same, but none of it's attached. And then we go from here into the charnel ground, seeing a corpse that's cast away. So you've got the corpse, and then it's 1 day, 2 days, a week old, etc. So the flesh starts to rot away, and then you just got the skeleton, and then the skeleton's starting to fall apart, and then you've got the bleached bones. So there's this move here to really recognize the body isn't what we think it is, which is moving back into never forget who you are. It's helping us remember who we are. And if this turns into that, am I really this? This is certainly the house I inhabit, whatever that means. This is the vehicle I travel around the world in and with which I engage in the world. But is it really me? And as I become mindful of all of these elements, it starts to shift. Feelings. So the second is fairly short. It's painful feelings, not painful feelings, or pleasant feelings, and then neutral feelings. Straightforward. And they're feelings of the flesh, feelings not of the flesh. What does that mean? So it's the same. We're moving here. It's the same. I've said lots of things are the same. So we are moving from the sensual realm, the realm of desire, into the realm of form. Feelings not of the flesh, pleasure not of the flesh, is this much more subtle pleasure of the subtle body or the form body, which is the body that is entered into, or it's not entered into, it's already there, but the body into which our awareness shifts, the body that, as we are able to start letting go of the more gross experiences of what we like and don't like, and ice cream and sticky gooey things, we step back from that and settle down, and awareness is then able to notice these more subtle realms. And so we're moving into these more subtle energy realms, and this is precisely what happens when one settles down in the jhana. It's no big deal. They're just absorption states. They're just these more subtle forms of concentration and awareness that emerge naturally as we settle down in our practice. So pleasure not of the flesh. And we're being mindful of this. It's just asking us to be present, be aware of it, be mindful of it. Internally and externally, phenomena of origination, because this too is fabricated. I just described, it's like lying on a beach sunbathing, get that nice warm tingling thing. That is fabricated. It's not judging it, it's just observing that's not an original state. That's a fabricated. There's a fabricated experience in there. And then remaining independent, unstained, not clinging to anything. So again, there's the same. Back to the refrain. Subduing greed and distress with reference to the world. So then we go through mind, and mind has passion, mind without passion, aversion without aversion, delusion without delusion. So we're just noticing, being mindful of mind states. What is the mind state? And being aware of the mind state as a phenomenon. It's not me, it is a mind state. A mind state. Stepping back from identity, being mindful of it. I mean, we're in it because we're mind in the mind, but there's no identity going on here. It's not I am angry. It's there is a mind state here of anger. All the way through to concentrated, not concentrated, released, not released. And we've got the same internally and externally phenomenon of origination. So these are the same, structurally exactly the same kinds of approaches to being with mind states and being mindful of mind states as we have being with and mindful of gross physical body states. Which is to say, in an important way, the mind and the body really aren't very different. There's one school of thought, the Chittamatra, which has mind only, which has 8 levels of consciousness. It's got the 5 body, and then it's got 3 different mind realms ending with this alaya vijnana. But they're just different consciousness. It's not that mind is separate from body. They're all, they're different in the same way that vision is different from smell. But they're within the same broad sphere. They're just forms of consciousness. So the mind is not that different from the body in this sense. It's not like mind is soul. Mind isn't. Mind's made of the same stuff. It's made of the same skandhas that the body is. And then the dharmas. And the dharmas, there's a bunch of these. So the 5 hindrances, being aware of the 5 hindrances, and the 5 clinging aggregates, and then the sixfold internal and external sense media. So here we're being mindful of, let's just say, fabrications. In one place, the hindrances are things that get in the way, but everything gets in the way. If we don't have things that get in the way, we don't have anything to practice with. So that really is our practice. Hindrances are precisely our practice. And hindrances are precisely what make us up. Because if we didn't have hindrances, we'd be awake. It'd be easy. We have hindrances. They're basically the same stuff as skandhas. Just different labels, and we look at them differently, but they're the same thing. And in a couple of places, the Buddha focuses on the sixfold internal and external sense media as being the all. Our universe is precisely and identically what we have access to through the 6 sense media. So that's it. That's everything. So the first part of this section on the dharmas is paying attention to our world, paying attention to our everything, being mindful of our everything. And then the second section goes through the 7 factors of awakening and the 4 noble truths, which are how we see through that which we think is real and that which we think really is us, because our world is us, right? We break it into an inside and outside, but it's us. We define as much by what we exclude as what we include. So it's moving from that and examining that to being mindful of the very tools we are using, the very path we are using to work through and see what's underneath or behind or before that world, which is to see what we really are, that which we must not forget. So we're being mindful of that, and ultimately, as we talked about earlier on right view, I think we talked about this, the final right view is when even that is released. No view at all. Final mindfulness, kind of not really such a thing, because final mindfulness, there's nothing to be mindful of, there's nobody being mindful, it just is. And then there's the conclusion, which says, well, if you do this form establishings of mindfulness for 7 years, you get these fruits, but let alone 7 years, if you did it for 1 year or 6 months or 3 months or 3 weeks or 2 days or even 1 day, you get these magical, mystical, wonderful things. So that's those 2 sutras. I'll say just a couple of words in conclusion, which are looking at something we've talked about before, which is one of the wonderful things about the Pali Canon. I think each of the different schools and Buddhist traditions has its own particular strengths. And one of the particular strengths, I think, of the Pali Canon and the Theravada tradition is it really focuses on this graduated path, on taking somebody stepwise through from very simple practices through to incrementally subtle practices, ultimately to release. Focusing on building skillful practices, building skillful selves, and increasingly skillful selves along the way, and shedding unskillful behaviors, unskillful habits, and unskillful identities along the way. So that it starts off by us just starting to practice paying attention, starting to try and remember things, try and remember what works, what doesn't work, and letting go of things that don't work. That builds and turns and grows into stronger concentration, greater levels of calm. This whole thing starts to settle down, and it stabilizes in a platform that naturally moves forward with increasing attention, increasing concentration. Along the way, insight starts to emerge, and we start to see things more clearly and notice ourselves seeing things more clearly. And we become mindful of noticing we're seeing things more clearly, which reinforces this whole settling down, calming, and stabilization. Discernment becomes sharper as we move through this. Discernment of noticing more skillful behaviors, noticing more unskillful behaviors, and becoming more skillful and subtle about noticing what's skillful, what's not skillful, and acting appropriately as a result. And as this matures, the practice moves more and more towards what can become, and over many lifetimes does become, 24/7 by 365 awareness and mindfulness, and not being fooled. 24/7 by 365, never being fooled, always remembering who you are. So mindfulness, you can, right effort, we have to balance how much effort. Too much effort can be dangerous. Too little effort can get us nowhere. Right mindfulness, I don't think you can have too much mindfulness. The challenge with mindfulness is figuring out where it's skillful, where it's not skillful, and cultivating it so it's strong. But it's something we're really trying to grow.